Hello.
Hi, Maria.
Hi, you know what? I apologize. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that it was not. But anyway, I'm here.
Okay, great. Calling this study session to order. We're going to move on to action item number 3.
Recording in progress.
Oops. We're going to move first to action item number 3, the contract amendment for Kelly Services Incorporated for educational staffing services. Do I have a motion?
I move we accept the item as presented.
And a second?
Second.
So we have folks that are going to present to us, I believe. Starting off with Dr. B, thank you. How are the kids?
Healthy.
Yay,
So
thank
thank
goodness.
you. Thank you for that. Good afternoon, Chairperson Rial, members of the board, Chancellor Duran-Cerda, members, colleagues, and guests. As the board is aware, there was a conversation at the most recent board meeting regarding a proposed increase to the Kelly Services Agreement. During that meeting, the board had a number of questions and concerns related to the agreement and related to how many out-of-state employees, the college employees, et cetera. We provided a number of, the board provided some questions. We've provided that information to the board. Just to do sort of a real quick and dirty where this came from, and then I'll avail you to hear also from the Employee Service Center, the folks who actually manage payroll. As a result of COVID and the growth of online instruction, the number of colleges and universities are all facing the challenge of having employees who reside in states other than their own. So it really got exacerbated with COVID. And as a result, there's becomes a compliance challenge for these colleges and universities, of which we are one, to make sure that because we are responsible for managing and maintaining, ensuring that all the withholdings, tax laws, and so forth are followed for our employees. This is incredibly difficult when you are talking about employees who might be temporary, they might be your employees for a little while, and reside in any number of states or localities, because it's not just that you have to follow other state laws, it's also various localities also have laws related to workers' compensation, what the withholding rates are, sick leave accumulation. Some states and localities have retirement expectations, et cetera. So there's a whole slew of requirements and regulatory things that we have to ensure that we're complying with. That became something that we identified the compliance concern and then looked for how do we solve this problem, because we were confident, and I'll turn it to Andrew in just a second, confident that we don't have either the personnel or the system resources to adequately ensure that compliance. That's where the recommendation came. We checked with other colleges and universities, tried to find best practices, and that's where we identified Kelly Services as a potential vendor that the board approved that contract going back in time. The agreement was set up so that we would have the ability to hire adjunct faculty and temporary instructors as needed when we have classes that need those instructors and we don't have anyone located in state. There's a procedure that the academic areas follow, and I'll turn it over to the academic side to talk about that, but to really identify who these individuals may be, and then to provide justification that yes, indeed, we need, in order to offer those classes, we need to hire these out-of-state employees. Again, in order to hire them and make sure that the college is maintaining compliance, strong recommendation is to use a firm that actually can turn on and off any state. They already have all of the system resources available, so that they then become the employer of record for those employees And then we have the flexibility that if in a given term, or even in the 8 weeks into the term, that if there is a need to add a class and it's a faculty member is out of state, that we then can address the student need. With that, that's the big general overview of the issue. Again, the original estimate that we put together was based on the individuals we knew of at the time. As we developed and got into the policy, the procedure in terms of implementing Kelly services, were more sophisticated at identifying more accurately people who are residing out of state. So the numbers grew significantly from what our initial estimate was. That's what we're coming to the board is for approval to increase the contract amount to finish up this current year for the demand that we have seen based on current terms. So with that, I'll turn it over. Andrew Plucker is the Executive Director of the Employee Service Center. Employee Service Center is a unit that oversees payroll and benefits for the college, so it's an interesting unit. It reports up through the finance side, so Andrew reports directly to me, even though there are crossover areas, and the communication with HR is really heavy. It is actually more on the finance side of the house than HR, but again, they communicate really actively. With that, I'll ask Andrew if he wants to come up.
Greetings, Chairperson Real, board members, Chancellor, colleagues, and guests. I'm Andrew Plucker, the Executive Director of the Employee Service Center. I'm here today with some members of the Pima Community College payroll staff. The unit consists of 5 payroll professionals who collectively possess over 70 years of experience in public sector payroll operations. We are here to encourage you to approve our request for an amendment to the contract agreement with Kelly Services. It is, in our opinion, the most efficient and cost-effective solution to providing compliant payroll services to the college's out-of-state temporary and adjunct faculty employees. When I came on board the ESC in July of 2022, the single largest compliance risk that the unit faced was posed by the college's employment of out-of-state personnel. This challenge is not unique to Pima. As Dave mentioned, many of our peer institutions currently face a similar challenge as brought on by the proliferation and reliance upon a remote workforce during the COVID pandemic. In the fall of 2022, I worked with the payroll staff to explore potential solutions to this issue. This included consulting with our peers who run payroll in colleges and universities across the Western United States. What we learned is that many of our colleagues were turning to third-party providers as a solution to the formidable issues and risks posed by multi-state payroll operations. As we developed the Kelly Services contract proposal that was approved by the board last spring, we estimated expenses based on funding for approximately 30 out-of-state employees. The estimate, as Dave mentioned, was arrived by taking into consideration the employees we knew were working out of state, plus some knowledge we had of prospective new hires, and including some room for possible growth. As part of the implementation of the Kelly Services Agreement, we launched several efforts to positively identify all of the out-of-state personnel employed by the college. These efforts led to the subsequent identification of the 50-plus temporary and adjunct faculty employees who have been onboarded with Kelly Services. While we consider those efforts to be a success in bringing the college in compliance with our obligations in relation to out-of-state employment, this number was considerably larger than expected, and it requires a larger spending authority than what we requested and was approved last year by the board. That is the purpose behind our request to amend the current year Kelly Services Agreement so we can continue to provide the payroll services to the college's out-of-state adjunct faculty for the remainder of the spring semester and into the beginning of the summer term. Thank you.
With that, I'll ask if the board has any additional questions or clarification that they'd like related to the item. Happy to answer anything we can.
Myself. Okay, here we go. Okay.
Go ahead, Maria.
Dr. B, one of the things that I noticed is that in the summer, there's a lot of out-of-state instructors for the summer program, and they're basic classes. And so what I'm asking is, why is that? I mean, I don't want to get into like trying to manage you guys or whatever, but it's just, I would assume that we would be offering our instructors first dibs on giving classes. And I know for a fact that we are not, we're not having classes in the summertime in some of the campuses, or I don't even know if maybe even the instructors are being offered to teach a class. So that's one of my concerns. And 50 seems like an awful lot. I understand that Pima Online has increased considerably because of the pandemic. And I also realize that it takes a lot more time. And then, of course, the next question is, do we hold the people out of state to the same standards as we do our own employees? So if you could answer that, please.
The ones I am most versed with. So the setup with the agreement with Kelly Services is that while the employees are technically Kelly Services employees, they follow our policies, procedures, and expectations in terms of teaching. So that's a key component to how the structure works. In terms of the selection of who teaches and whether we need to have the out-of-state faculty members, that's an academic decision, so it's based on deans and department chairs. I will have to defer to the academic side. Other than what we did is we worked up a procedure for them to do basically a justification. So they have to go through a set of questions to say, we weren't able to find someone to teach this class. But with that, I'll defer over to the academic side. I don't know, Jeff, Peace, if you're...
Jeff is coming down.
Yeah.
Yeah, so with respect to the hiring of the summer has been significantly more online since the pandemic, and we have not gone back to having as many in person on the West Campus, which is where the primary sets of courses are offered. In that process, I would say that the online staffing in the summer is relatively proportional to what you see in the fall. So I don't think that the Kelly service that's used in the summer is disproportionately towards Kelly Services faculty. One of the challenges is that we have had a faculty that were Pima employees as full-time people, some in staff positions, some in faculty. We've had some adjunct faculty that have lived here in Pima County and have since moved. And so they may have already been on the schedule because we schedule so far in advance. So I don't see that there's a disproportionate use of Kelly Services for summer, other than to say there's a disproportionate use of online in the summer. And because Kelly Services is used for that modality, that same proportionality exists. And I'll just reiterate what Dave Beat said about the hiring process. They have to meet the same standards to be hired. As a matter of fact, they have to also have the Teach 125 certification to teach online, which is above what an in-person person would have to have if they were teaching for us. And then they're evaluated and their courses are reviewed as they were any online instructor, whether they're Kelly Services or not.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a couple questions. I just want all my fellow board members to realize that these aren't necessarily Pima College employees anymore. They're Kelly Services employees. So there will be, I would assume, it'll take longer to get things done, considering it's going to have to go through more than just the normal Pima College routes of anything, right? Whether it be discipline, whether it be, telling them that we need them to increase their credentialing or whatever it is, right? So I think that that is significant. I'm hoping that the college is actually reaching out to the department chairs in all the departments before we just straight away hire somebody online to teach something, because I I know it's anecdotal, it might not mean anything, but I have a lot of adjunct faculty math friends because I taught there for so long, and I hear them saying, oh, I only got one class this semester. Oh, I only got 2 classes this semester, when normally they teach 3 or whatever it is, right? So I'm just wondering, are we really doing the best for our college and the best for our students, since now they're going to have teachers that aren't actually Pima College employees? You know, they're going to be employees of Kelly Services. Thank you. One other question, I received an email from a department head last semester, or maybe in the spring last year, and she was wondering why she was having a hard time getting an online instructor. And then she was mentioning something like a 30% payback, and so there's all of those things that I don't understand. I did have somebody come up to me after the last board meeting to try to explain it, that it was a 20% payback. I think he said it was for overhead. So each employee, besides their salary and then their benefits, I guess for adjunct faculty, it's like 15% because they're not full-time. We're not doing all of the full-time expenses, and I get that. But then he said there was also a 20%, I think he called it a payback for overhead, and that just, to me, I see Dr. B's eyes like, what the heck is she talking about? That's exactly what I was feeling when I was hearing him explain it to me. So that's my next question. And then I guess that's it. Thank you.
Yeah. So generally understand what the question is. So if we're employing the faculty ourselves, you're paying the adjunct load rate for the faculty times the number of units that the load that they're teaching. In addition to that, the college budgets and has expenses for the different benefits related costs for that adjunct faculty. So for us, that's we budget for about a 19% fringe rate for adjunct faculty. So that covers Social Security, covers workers' compensation, covers the various things that you need to do. So with Kelly Services, when they say that the contract, if you look at the contract is the load hour charges for the adjunct faculty plus 35%. Within that 35%, about roughly 20% of that is what we would be paying for that adjunct faculty for their benefits costs. The rest of it would be Kelly Services administrative overhead for them to manage and to make money. I mean, let's be honest, they're a for-profit company. It's in their interest, they're doing this to make money. So, however, if you look at the estimate that's in your board pack, the cost that we're estimating would be their overhead, how much they make to cover their own expenses in-house, because they have staffing expenses to manage this, they have system expenses to manage this, et cetera. The college would be paying about $130,000, roughly more than we would if they were our own employees. So we are paying more money for these employees. I will add that the way that we're structuring Kelly Services is that gets charged back to the unit. So there is a disincentive to the unit because they're budgeted to fund for a certain number of adjunct faculty, that this would be a more costly version of adjunct faculty, so they have to absorb that increased cost. So it creates a disincentive for this that over time you will find, I think the units will go, this is making it harder for us to offer classes at, instead of 23 students per class, I now have to get down to 21 students per class. Sorry, 25 students, I'm going to need to go the other way, to 25 students per class because I need to cover these out-of-state costs that we're incurring. So there is a built-in disincentive to doing this. It's going to take a little bit of time before that works out. I think it's been made clear by the board that the board would like to have this as little as possible. And I think that the academic side, I'm going to speak for Jeff, but the academic side, I think, will pass that down and I think work to make this the absolute minimum amount of employee or of adjunct faculty as possible, while still ensuring that we're going to be able to provide students with the education that they want.
Thank you. And then just the last thing I wanted to mention is when I seemed a little frustrated at the board meeting last week, it was because In February and March, I asked 3 different times for a list of these people. And each time I was given a completely different list, which of course, you know me, I went online and I searched in the directory were they employees of the college. The first time, a lot of them weren't even teaching. Second list I got was something different. The third list, it wasn't via an email, but Lee Lambert passed it to me. So each time I saw huge discrepancies in the list I was given, meaning I think it was baloney. And I do appreciate whoever wrote me this list this time, because once again, I did check all of them, and thank you. And this list seemed like it was actually, there's only a few little question marks I have about 2 employees. Everybody else was on there. I went to the scheduled classes, and I did that those last 3 times too. So the first 3 list, and imagine how much time that took, right? I know it's taken time for you guys to answer our questions, but that is the main reason I don't feel comfortable with this, because I think I was given information last time that used a lot of my time and had me running around in circles. So thank you for this very detailed and appropriate list. Now, having said that, I would like to vote for this, but I won't be able to ever vote for this again unless I'm assured that we are reaching out to all the department chairs to make sure that people in Tucson can cover these jobs, if at all appropriate. And I recognize for math, you have to have a certain level of math ability to teach a Calc 1 class, right? And maybe we don't have enough adjunct faculty to do that. But I want to be assured that we are using local people to teach our classes in the future instead of just doing this. It sort of seems willy-nilly, and I know that it might not be, but considering there are math folks out there that aren't teaching the full amount they can, and we're hiring a bunch of math people online, I'm just concerned about that. Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
Madam Chair, this whole topic has morphed into something that didn't start this way. We started this way working on a payroll dilemma and outsourcing the payroll because we didn't have people in-house that could manage the functions that needed to be done. Now we're talking about how we should hire people. And I think, if the board really wants to get into this, then we ought to sit down and talk to some department heads about why they're doing these kinds of things, not the finance people. Let's move on with this topic. And if you want to put something on the agenda or a study session in the future about what the hiring process is for faculty at Pima College, then I think that's what we ought to talk about.
If I could make a comment, this is specifically for adjunct faculty, not for full-time faculty, correct? Yeah.
Although there are quite a few people on this list that are teaching way more than the 10.5 hours. I can just pass this to you if you want to look at it. And there are quite a few people, so that wouldn't be our normal way of doing adjunct faculty. So I do know that there are 4 people or 5 people that on our directory are listed as instructional faculty, full-time faculty. So there are at least 4 people on lists that are instructional faculty, not adjunct.
Madam Chair, one last comment or question. In my experience in the field, that when you're outsourcing for educational services, usually the only way that you're going to break even on the cost is if you reduce the salary of the employee. And the employee pays the difference in what expenses we incur to hire an outside service to do this. So I think that needs to be part of this conversation too. If you want it to be a break-even point, you have to pay them less.
I think there'll be a time when we do the budget portion today where we can actually resurface that comment, because I think that when we talk about the adjunct faculty funding and the classroom funding structures, then when you all explain how this fits in with that, and you can then resurface that point.
I call for the question.
Okay. All in favor of paying Kelly Services this additional amount to finish out the 2024 year, I believe that's what it is? Say aye.
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 Any opposed?
I oppose.
Okay, so motion passes 4-1. Moving on to item number 2 on the agenda. Thank you very much, everybody. We appreciate you being here today.
Folks who often aren't properly recognized for making sure that everybody gets paid every 2 weeks. Thank you all. You guys rock. It is. We've often said it's the most important thing anyone does in an organization is pay their people. So. Yep. Okay, good evening, or good afternoon. I'm not sure if we're to evening yet. I think we're not quite there. It's my pleasure to have a conversation with the board today, again, following up on the conversations we've had at the previous study session and some other conversations we've had, talking more in detail about the budget, giving more updated information, talking a little bit more specifically about some of the direction and feedback the board has given us and what that means, so that we can lead into the March meeting, during which we plan to propose a tuition. Well, if we hear that you're favorably inclined toward a tuition increase, that's when we would propose a tuition increase. I'll get back to I'm not jumping the gun, just saying March, it's important that if we increase tuition, it's important that that happens at the March board meeting. The reason for that is because the fall schedule opens up in early April, and that means that you can then set up the new tuition and fees in time for students to enroll, and that prevents or avoids the problem of if you change tuition rates after that, you have to then go back and rebill, right? It's not something you can't do, it's just not good practice. And so we've always tried to get tuition decisions to happen for March in order for the schedule to open up in April. As we've talked about, the board has sort of the general parameters are looking at what our expenditure priorities are, balancing them with revenue projections. Mostly we talk about it in the case of okay, start with the current year budget and then make the changes to revenues, make the changes that you know about to expenditures. So it's an incremental budgeting model. It's not exclusively incremental, but mostly that's the way we talk about it, because you're assuming that we're starting from a decent place and then saying, okay, well, we know we're getting these additional revenues. Are those going to offset the additional costs that we know we're incurring? So we're always trying to balance. We have had the issue of enrollment, which is misaligned with the size of our staff. We've talked at length with the board about that for a number of years. So working through a plan to try and right-size the institution. And then, as I mentioned, we have gotten some board feedback, principally related to, I think, a strong hesitance to increase either tuition or property taxes, particularly in light of the size of our infrastructure staff from a staffing standpoint. So we'll be talking about how does that look and how we can right-size the institution that way. Factoring in the basic things that we're starting with, we've talked about sustaining the class and compensation structure. So because that factors in, because we're tying our positions to market, and that the midpoint is tied to having 8 years of experience, that the way the structure is that if you're hired at something, say if you're hired at the minimum, and if at 8 years you want to be at the midpoint, you need to move up each year a certain amount. So factoring in that, a year of experience to the budget, that's one of the base things that we want to start things with. Contractual obligations, principally those are things like utility costs and IT system licenses, things like that. Factoring in what increased costs you might have in a given year for that. We do not budget for inflation. So office supplies, things like that, we don't build in a natural, inflation last year went up by 5%. All of that stuff is absorbed. That has always been the case, so that over time that it can become a problem, but I want to make sure that the board is clear on that we don't build extra inflation into operating expenses in any way. So everything is held flat other than known priority changes or known increases for known contractual costs. Mostly that's done by reallocating resources or absorbing those cost increases, trying to find more efficient ways to do things or less expensive ways to do things. One of the things that the staff is doing this year is looking back at historical spending and then pulling money. If units have historically not spent to their budgets, pulling that money back and pulling it back, so we'll reduce budgets to a more accurate level. I want to caution the board, that doesn't mean that they save money. So let me do my little simple analogy here. If you have a budget for $100 for office supplies, and historically the unit always spends $90 on office supplies, so you have $10 of savings versus the budget. If you then say, okay, well, let's change the budget to $90, what can happen is they spend $90 and they spent exactly to their budget. They don't save versus the budget, so you don't have any operational savings. So the expenditures might not change at all, just the budget goes down. So that's something that we always also have to factor in. Not a huge issue for the board to be aware of, but it's something that more from an operational standpoint, I get concerned that if we get more efficient with how we budget and we reduce budgets for actual spend, but people are spending 100% of their budget, you might be right back to where you started. So you can save a little bit by reducing budgets because mostly people will come in a little bit under, but you can run into that problem.
Do we do the same thing, excuse me, with FTEs?
So FTEs are budgeted, so the college budgets them. We budget for salary savings. That's built into how the overall budget is, but the units do not realize salary savings. So in other words, if in my area I have a vacancy, the college saves that money from not filling that position. I don't have that money in my budget to spend. So that's how we control that problem, where you can suddenly have an issue with, oh, well, we don't have an ABC in finance, as an example, right now. That's a fair amount of money. That doesn't mean that all of a sudden we're going to do massive travel. It doesn't turn into that in my budget. And that's how so we do some control over that. The downside is, though, if they do need to cover expenses by temporary wages, generally they will absorb that. And if there are special needs that might come out of that, we would then be in conversations with the units. But mostly salary savings, we budget for a pretty significant amount of salary savings in a given year. It's about 90. The amount that we spend on our personnel budget is about 95, 96% of what's budgeted. So that 5% becomes important to saving money. And then, again, resizing the staffing structure for the enrollment realities. We've talked about that. Different metrics that we use to identify how staffed we are versus the size of our enrollment. Okay, this is a quick review. $1 of tuition, it roughly represents an increase of $350,000. Property taxes, levy neutral, that's just for growth of new property. That doesn't change the tax rate for people as an average. Will generate about just a little bit under $2 million for that. So the college doesn't do anything different. That's essentially holding things flat. We also have the capacity to go all the way up to $6.2 million because we're a little bit under our max, and the max is based on you can increase by 2% if the board goes through the truth and taxation process, can increase by 2% every year. So we have about 3% between our starting point and our maximum right now. Other revenues, we're expecting to get an additional, just a little bit under $2 million of additional revenue, principally coming from investment income and also from some increased revenue generated from Prop 207. That's the Smart and Safe Arizona legalized marijuana bill. Okay, this is just for context where we're at in terms of tuition versus our peer institutions. So there's 2 bars there for Pima and Mojave. That's because we both have per credit charges. So for us, we have an IT charge and a student services charge. Those total $5.50 per credit. And our base tuition is $92. So that's where you see the blue chart. The blue line there is $92. So our base tuition is one of the lower in the state. And we're right in the middle, basically, with what our combined per credit hour rate is. So we're along with our peers. I'll say that the peers on it, the median increase proposed for our peer institutions is $3 per credit hour this year. So most of them will be going up from where this point is. And then this is the comparison of where our property tax rates versus our peer institutions, and we're on the very low end of the spectrum in terms of our property tax rate. My watch just buzzed me for no reason. Okay, let's talk about ongoing challenges that we've talked about. Again, I'm not going to get too much into this, but the struggling enrollment outlook, the fact that our enrollment has decreased significantly from COVID to now, but our staffing has not decreased proportionately with that. We have limited potential growth in other areas. We've talked about the two that we have control over really are tuition and property taxes, but we want to keep tuition as low as possible, and property taxes being good stewards of public funds, being judicious with our property tax revenues. That puts in place what we're trying to do which is identify structural inefficiencies, recognizing that it's challenging at this institution to make changes. There's a tendency to want to have all services at all locations. There's a tendency to want to continue to offer the same service that we've always offered, because there might be a small number of people who continue to do that. For example, cash payments, things like that, that become, with how many people actually make cash payments at the college is very small at this point, versus historically we used to have cashiers, and the majority of payments used to come in through cash or through the on-site cashiering. Making that kind of change isn't as easy as it sounds, because there's always pressure. If someone comes in and they want to pay and you don't have the hours of the cashier open, that kind of thing leads to pushback and dissatisfaction for the individual who's trying to make a payment. In addition, classroom inefficiencies, things like how full classes are, making sure that classes are available. We have, and I'm going to get into the adjunct faculty model, the classroom funding model, so you can see how that works, because we've had some good conversations with that. Those kinds of things, scheduling can be really inefficient. Having courses available at all locations at decent times might lead to a class having 10 students early in the morning versus that same class later in the afternoon or online might have 30 students. So those are inefficiencies that if you're offering the class and you're meeting the need of the 10 students or the 8 students, at that time, that's great for the students, but overall, it's an inefficient model versus what we're trying to do. And then reallocating resources. When we have growth areas, or we have new priorities that we have to push resources to, shifting from the way we were structured to a new way. The most obvious example of that is how much has had to shift from traditional education to having resources for the sophisticated online and educational tools that we now have for state-of-the-art educational training. What we did is we put together 3 scenarios for you, but I have a model that we can play with. So then you guys can, I want to make this interactive. The 3 scenarios are basically what the board originally has, the guidance that we've gotten, which is what does it look like if we don't increase the tax levy, if we don't have a tuition increase, and then what we have is built into it is a year of additional experience. In this particular case, it also adds 3% additional to the adjunct faculty model, to the adjunct faculty load rate. And then the college is absorbing the additional costs of benefits, and that it would not provide a pool for compensation increases beyond the 1 year of experience. So what we've done in the last few years when we've done the class comp is done a year of experience, or it's the minimum of, in the most, I think it's both years, it was the minimum of $2,000 or how much your year of experience gets you. That means that everybody gets an increase. The way that the scenario A is structured is not everybody would get an increase, just the people who are below their sort of target point. Scenario B, similar to that one, only what it does, and then the position reduction, so that's based on an average position. It's not a specific, no position has been identified, it's just on average. How many positions would that take to reduce, again, through what we've talked about, through attrition. In order to have a balanced model in that scenario A would be a reduction of 22 positions. Second scenario is to increase the student services fee or tuition. It really is somewhat synonymous. There's a slight difference between them, but it's a per credit charge of $3. Essentially what that's doing is offsetting, and I'll get in when I show the model and the page that you guys are probably one ahead of me already, is that helps offset the structural budget problem that we have between athletics and performing arts. So we've talked with the board about how that used to be funded by the student services fee. That student services fee, because enrollment has declined over time, is now insufficient to help cover the costs for athletics and for the performing arts as they are, as stands. So what it's saying is that we would increase the student services fee to help cover some of those costs and offset those costs. If we did that, again, the model is basically the same as the other one. It reduces the number of positions that it decreases the number of positions that we would reduce from 22 to 10. And then the last model is more of a making progress model. So, and it's also analogous to what the college historically has done. So increase the property tax levy by 2%. Again, it's keeping that student services fee at $3. It would give the 1 year of additional experience, 3% increase for adjunct faculty, and then it would give a little bit of money so that we could do a minimum increase for all of the employees. That also has built into it, again, I'm going to say that this is a making progress model that has a reduction of 25 positions, so it would still be getting at what the board's concern is that we have too many staff. This would be making the staffing size more efficient. In addition to that, and I'm going to shoot ahead to the model, in addition to that, that model, scenario C, also helps the college structurally. So that helps set aside money for strategic priorities, for shifting resources, for handling deferred maintenance better than we currently do. So that's how that scenario C, so it's a combination. Again, it's sort of a cafeteria model. I'm throwing out a few different examples of how you do it, but you can kind of pick whichever entree you want. And this is talking about, this shows different things related to the adjunct faculty model. And then I'm going to stop because then we can sort of play around with the models a little bit, talk about what the board's priorities, what their interests are, and how they would all balance together. What this model shows is what happens when you add an additional course. So tuition currently $92, adjunct faculty load rate is currently, just looking at the base model, the left-hand column there. So the expectation, the way the college budget is set up, is that on-site classes are funded at a 20 students in the classroom average. Online is funded at 25 students on average. How that plays out then, if you look at the base model, is the amount of tuition generated, in-state tuition generated by that particular class. If 20 students pay their tuition, that generates $5,500 of tuition. The comp and benefits for that adjunct faculty right there would be about $3,200, a little more than $3,200. Getting back to Mr. McLean or Dr. McLean's question or comment earlier, that if you factor in the additional costs of Kelly's services, that's where that cost would go up. For a class that's an adjunct faculty cost that has Kelly's services as an out-of-state employee, the cost for that would be worse, and the bottom line would be worse. But looking at, so for the average class, the net marginal income is a little over $2,200. That class generates 2 FTSE, so this is a 3-credit class, 3-load class, so the most typical kind of class. And then that versus budget-based net that's compared to what the budget expectation is. So that's why that's a 0, right? So that's the base model. If you estimate that we have about 5,000, because this place is big, it's always like, these numbers always shock me because that is like a large number of sections that we teach. So 5,000 sections of adjunct faculty courses, that if you take that net marginal income, that you generate a little bit of additional money for that class, and you multiply it out by how many sections we teach, that actually generates support for the other parts of the college to the tune of about $11 million, give or take. I mean, these numbers are rough, by the way. You don't need to totally fixate on are they perfect? The model is just to say, overall, does it work or get you in trouble? The idea is, close enough. Again, then there's a comparison for what online looks like and the expectations for online, because these are conversations that the board has had, questions they've had. Okay, now this column here, Tier 1 and Tier 2, show what happens if you add a class that has low enrollments. So these are set up to be, they break even, so that, in other words, you add a class, it doesn't have that many enrollments, but the tuition covers the direct expenses of that class. So for this particular case, for the Tier 1, that's the less experienced adjunct faculty, they would, to break even, that is so that we don't lose money on that class, it would be about 12 students, okay? So you can see generates $3,300 of tuition, the comp and benefits is a little bit under $3,300, so the net marginal income is $52 for that class. So we're not losing money, we're making $52. Except the problem of that works if it's just adding a class, one class at the end of the line. Problem is that we can't sustain that overall. If we did that for all of our classes, we would have a huge problem because you'd be essentially not generating that $11 million that helps support the rest of the college. Tier 2 becomes a little bit harder because the costs for the adjunct faculty are greater. It's 5% greater for Tier 2 faculty. So in order for that class to essentially break even, it's 13 students. So that's the question that's come up about, like, well, can you just add a class? So on the margin, you can not lose money by adding a class with 12 or 13 students, depending on who's teaching it, if they're adjunct faculty. If they are regular faculty, whole nother can of worms. That number for regular faculty, if they're teaching, just to say the comparison to the base, so a regular faculty teaching 20 students at a typical regular faculty salary, that generates a net marginal income of negative $4,000 per class. So, and then versus the base, that's negative $6,000. So, Greg, you asked the question, can't you just add a faculty, a regular faculty? The problem is that no, that's going to have to be covered by property taxes. These all assume that they're being covered by tuition only. What I'm saying is no. Property taxes cover a large share of our operations, and we have to always be aware of that. However, we do have some expectation that tuition helps cover the costs of education, and that's what this is intended to show. Last part of this is if you increase the adjunct pay by 3%, sort of what we put in the scenarios, that results to the budget a negative $98 per section. If you multiply that out, that's around $500,000, which is what we would tell you in the normal model. It's just a different way to show it than we've ever shown it before. If that was entirely borne by tuition, so you said, okay, well, what we want to do is, well, let's increase the adjunct faculty load by 3%, but we want that to totally be borne by increasing tuition to offset that. That would be an increase of just a little bit more than $1.60. So different ways to look at it. There are ways that we haven't talked about it before, but it gives you some context and a different way to see marginal class adds and what the impact is to the college, and then the challenge of the scalability of it all. Because it's fine if you do one class and you add one class at the end. The problem is if the whole thing works that way, or if all of a sudden you started offering all of your classes and we were just having 12 students in every class, it doesn't work. It doesn't noodle out, and we start having problems. Okay, I've already talked about this stuff, and I promised you that I would make this interactive and fun. So let me pull up the model, and then the board can have their comments, questions, and give ideas.
Dave, while you're pulling that up, we at one point in our discussions talked about differential tuition for certain programs with higher costs. Is there anything new in these models in that regard? Or
anything new in the models as we're talking about it? What we've looked at, and it's more of a net change in terms of the slight increase in one area, slight decrease in another area, and it sort of nets out to zero as the college historically has done differential. What we should talk about, though, is in the span of the next year. actually, let me clarify, because you don't probably know how the college has done differential. So what it did is we looked at the cost of direct instruction for each program, and then the cost of direct instruction, and then the number of students taught by those disciplines. And then the programs that have greater than 2 times the median cost per footsie, and then those that are above, they're sort of 2 tiers, those get differentials put on them. So there's the really high cost programs. Again, that is not the total cost of the program, that is just the direct instruction. So really what you find is that reflects the programs where they have to have student to teacher ratios of like 10-1, like nursing, for example, where there are a lot of restrictions in terms of how many students can be in the class, that sort of thing. Aviation is another one. Then what we did is we had the differential is tied to the proportional share that's covered by tuition. So it's really, the differential is only increased to cover the direct expenses to a proportion of what the total costs of that direct costs are. So it's a small, it does not cover the total costs of the program, it covers a share of the costs. It's a very moderate cost increase. It's like $20 to $30 per unit for only those differential programs. Now, that's how we've done it historically. If you actually started looking at the true costs of some of these programs and you say, okay, well, aviation has this whole facility and it has special support services. What if you factor in the utilities and the custodial costs and the special support costs for that program? You would find that those differential costs go up dramatically. And then that's what I'm saying, if the board is interested in that kind of a conversation, I think we're at a point where we have the data for a handful of programs to start looking at that and start identifying, do we want to look at that? And then the other thing that you'd factor in is, okay, earnings potential for those programs is always important. And then looking at market comparisons, right? So it wouldn't be just, our differential is going to be now there's $40,000 a year for aviation, and it turns out that some other school, obviously we don't have any other competitor in town, but a competitor in the state or something like that, maybe their tuition is 25. So you wouldn't want to get uncompetitive with it. But I think that we are now, particularly with a handful of the programs that have specific clear facilities tied to them, we're in a position where we could actually really look at those kinds of differentials that would be significant. And then talk about, well, how much do we want to look at that? We're not in a position to be able to do that. The data is just starting to be good enough for that, partly because aviation up till now was the only clear standalone program. Now we have automotive, and then we're seeing some of these other programs. We can start allocating out other costs to these programs. But it's going to take some time and some thought to do so. So at this point, what we've looked at is just looking at, it's been a while since we looked at the differential. So looking at it the way we used to do it, what happens is a couple of the programs go from the higher cost to the lower cost. A couple, I think there's a little bit of change between them. And then looking at how the proportion, it kind of nets to not much. It kind of balances. Some things are a little bit more, some things are a little bit less, but it doesn't generate a lot of additional income for the college at this point. So I'm not including it. Sorry, long-winded answer. It's not in here, but anyway, I think it's a conversation that we're getting prepared and we're getting in a position to be able to have a real conversation about that. Okay, so I have a model where we can plug and play, if you will. What it does is it looks at the primary variables that the board talks about: property tax, tuition and fees. Think about this is either tuition and fees or it's on a per credit basis is how it's calculated. It could be student services fees. What happens if state aid? So one thing I didn't mention is the state has a budgetary challenge, and there is about $1.7 million of STEM funding that I think is somewhat at risk. Hopefully it isn't. That's not factored in here. That's another reason why that third model that has a plus to it, it would help compensate if we lost revenue from something that comes later in the game. That would help us be able to sort of keep flat regardless of that. The regular salaries is set up so that you could add up pool amount. So in other words, it would be if I put a 1% in there, that's saying that other than in addition to the year of experience, we're adding in a 1% pool across the board to provide minimum increases. That 1% translates roughly to $1,000 minimum, just to keep in the back of your mind. And then adjunct faculty, we can change that from the 3% that we currently have. Adjustments and reductions, right now it's built so that there's not a cost increase for the contractual obligations, utilities, any of that stuff. This model is assuming that we will have cost reductions, because we have a number of cost reduction strategies that we're looking at, and we know of a few things that are going to be where we are going to realize some savings. So right now I have this put in at a flat level. I think that I'm confident we're going to be able to do that. This is there for the board to say, we want more, we want an across-the-board type of a reduction, and then I can sort of show you what that would look like. Similarly, so this folds in, though, that $2 million of structural problem that is the athletics and performing arts. So again, that sets it up where we're continuing to do the athletics programs and the performing arts programs that we currently do, right? So if there was a reduction there, the reality would be, okay, we have to probably look at what we're offering in those areas and cut back. And then the offsetting position reductions is just set up to do a balance to try and make it all work. All right, I've explained the model. Any questions, comments, things that you want to look at or feedback that you'd like to give? Again, the goal today is to get something clear so that we can put together a proposal in March that would include both what the tuition, if there's no tuition increase, obviously we would just say that we're not increasing tuition this year. But it would also, what we're looking to do is to tie also to make a board statement related to property tax. Typically, we don't make that commitment until May. That's when the final budget comes together and the board makes a decision. That gives flexibility. If the state decides to do something weird, we still have the one tool left other than reductions. But I know the board is interested in making commitments and getting that set. Quite honestly, from our standpoint, if we know what the board is interested in from a property tax standpoint, it makes the whole process quite a bit easier bureaucratically. Like, we know exactly what to do, and it's not a last minute thing. We're not making changes last minute. So it sort of sets in place what the overall budget would look like. And well, the rest of it sort of would flow. That's our goal for March.
So in the part where you talked about I understand the adjunct faculty benefit and the additional year, you said that would leave out a certain group of individuals that wouldn't receive a salary increase. Can you help me understand what is that group and why aren't they covered by one of those other two?
Well, depends on what someone's pay was prior to the college, if they were hired above the minimum. So for example, someone comes in and they're really experienced. This doesn't happen a ton, but it happens. So they're hired, they have a lot of experience to do that exact job, and we hire them essentially at the level of 4 years of experience. So until they get to that 4 years of experience point, they would be above their target threshold and they wouldn't get an increase. So there's, I think it's probably about a third of the staff and faculty are in that category. I'm like totally guessing. I'm pretty sure that's about right. It also could depend on what their job was prior to what their current job is. Like, people make transfers, do different things. So it's for a number of different reasons that you might be above your target point.
So just tell me if what I say is correct, the way I understood it. So everybody gets the year of experience, but for some people that year of experience doesn't translate into additional dollars based on where they are in the range. Okay, I got you.
Yes, yeah. So what we're doing is we're comparing what their current pay rate is. We're giving them, everybody gets, sorry, yeah, that's clunky language, I suppose, since I said a year of experience just for somebody. Everybody gets a year of experience, but then it's compared to where their target point is, and if their current pay is above the target pay after getting another year of experience, then they would be set to not get an increase. Like, their pay would be flat. So the minimum increase gives people the ability to have some increase for the year to offset inflationary costs, that sort of thing. And we've been doing that since we implemented the class comp structure, and it will, if we don't have something like that, there will be dissatisfied people, right? Because they will not have a pay increase, and that doesn't go over particularly well.
So here we hire these people because they've got skills and talents and we really need them, but then we're not going to give them a pay increase for a couple years.
In that case, yes, that could
Yeah.
happen.
What about the people at the top of the pay scale? Are they in the
Same thing.
Yeah, and how many people are up there at the top, more just in ballpark? Okay, but are we talking like a third of our employees won't get a pay raise if we do this?
I think it's about a third.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm totally going on memory. It's in that ballpark. I can certainly have that information for March. At the next board meeting, I can definitely explain what that would be. I just am going off of memory and seeing lots of numbers on spreadsheets, and I think that's about right. Go ahead.
My other question is, to me, it seems like I've been advocating, and I'm going to ask again, that we have a survey given out to all of our students currently in classes. What do they want to take next semester? Where would they prefer to take these classes and what times? Let's figure out what our clients, I don't like to use that because I don't think we're a business, but in some ways we are, right? Let's figure out what they need and then let's offer as many of those as we can, because if we can increase enrollment, a lot of these tricky spots will be eradicated, right? If we can just start increasing significantly enrollment. And I think how we do that is we offer classes where and when they're asking. The Chancellor and I were together in a meeting, I can't even remember right now who it was, but the daughter of this person has to take her classes at 3 different campuses, and sometimes she has all of those classes, and she's not like taking, rocket science and basket weaving, and, she's taking normal college classes. So anyway, I think we need to do that survey to make sure we're serving the needs of our students and hopefully helping us in the same aspect.
Yeah, I mean, the key, and you've heard this through the strategic enrollment management plan, that sort of thing. The key thing is to not lose enrollment, right? Students who might be interested in coming here, students who are here and leave, right? And Chair Real, you've mentioned that one in particular, right? The idea of ensuring student success, trying to keep the students we have, trying to make them be successful, absolutely helps.
So STAR and academics are working on that survey to send out this semester.
Tell me again, I missed this whole conversation. What's the fee? Where does the fee go?
The student services fee?
Yeah.
It supports primarily athletics, but it also supports student activities. So so there's base tuition, and then there's $3.50, I believe, that goes to support athletics and these student services, these student activities. And then there's an IT fee that's $2, and that helps support the IT resources around the college. So the total is $5.50.
So if you go back to slide 10.
That'd be good if I was actually on the slide.
So by increasing the fee, it would not have any effect on any of these compensation models.
What it does is it cuts down the number of positions that we're reducing. So if you do the comparison, those two side by sides, and let me show you where the actual dollars are. So what that does is
What
it
slide is
generates,
that? I can't-
this is slide number, this was 3 ahead, like 13, 12, slide 12. So there you can see how it plays out in terms of the increasing, it adds about $1 million of revenue. Everything else stays the same, and then we just offset it to keep a balance at the bottom by reducing the number of positions that we're reducing. Again, these are just ideas. It
Yeah,
doesn't
I'm
mean
still
that's what you would do.
having trouble with the concept. So
Yeah.
if we charge $3 more and it goes in the pot for athletics, that doesn't have anything to do with compensation. We could give the coaches a raise, or we could add a team,
Well, what
or we
that-
could buy uniforms But how does that affect compensation?
So why that's put in there is currently the general operations are supporting athletics and performing arts to the tune of $2 million. So what it does is if we add that $3, it helps cover that amount that we're already covering.
Okay, I
That's how it-
didn't hear that.
That's how it's all in.
So basically, we're subsidizing athletics. This would decrease our
Self-supporting,
Subs-
yes.
it isn't
Yes.
anywhere, even
True.
at the University of Arizona,
It
football
used-
is not.
Yes, it used to be more self-supporting. It is, over time, become unsupporting, like we're heavily subsidizing it. So it's trying to address that structural deficit and tying the student services fee directly to that, but not the whole thing, right? Not covering the whole thing. It would cover half of it.
But I'd prefer to have a conversation that says, we're going to charge the students more money for athletics, but we're not going to increase athletics. We're just going to decrease the amount of money the college is giving to athletics.
I'm not disagreeing that that is a true statement, and that would be an accurate statement.
But if we said we were going to give the money to student activities and athletics, if we increased fees, we wouldn't have an improvement in the budget scenario.
Correct.
But we would have an improvement in student activities and athletics, which because if we increase the fees, decrease our subsidy, we're actually changing a philosophy.
Right, so what the counterpoint would be, if we don't subsidize it and we don't have a source of revenue to help offset it, there would be, at some point, you're talking about reducing to make it balance.
Or giving them more money.
Right.
Yeah, but I think we ought to call it that. Because the person on the street sees an increase in student fees, they're gonna ask me, well, what other services are you gonna give the students? And I'm gonna say none.
Right. None that they would see, right. But you're not reducing anything either. I mean, the counterpoint is, okay, well, if different mindset, right? You're saying, okay, we have a structural deficit and we need to cut to address that structural deficit.
You could do the same thing by saying we're gonna increase tuition.
Totally agree. It is a little bit of semantics. I mean, and it's semantics around the fact that we have a structural deficit problem of some sort, and we have limited revenue possibilities that we can play around with.
I think it's more of an optics problem and not being totally open with where that funding is going. Just one thought. The assessed valuation, I know you gave it to us. What's the increase in assessed valuation across the board without us doing anything?
The money the number that matters is that the growth of new properties generates an additional $2 million. It's $1.9 million of additional revenue.
What percent would that be?
Let's see, we're at 140 something, so two over 140. It's 1.6%, something like that. Yeah.
So do you get the information on the average homeowner on assessed valuation increase?
We get the total for the county, so what the net taxable current value is, and this is the slide that's got that information that was later in the back. So primary, whoever did that was cool. Someone's doing some controlling that isn't me. So there, I said it was about 140 million. So currently $136 million. That's where we're at currently. Next year, this is from new properties, so that generates 1.9 million. The net taxable value, this is essentially 1.06 billion. That's the total Pima County taxable valuation number and how much it's grown. So the overall change, which is 5.7%, that's not the money, that's why I keep saying the thing that matters is more like 1.6%. That's the new property. How much assessment values go up because the property is assessed at a higher value, that doesn't change the situation for the college. The only thing that changes it for the college is new properties.
But it changes for the homeowner.
It does, yeah.
So do we know a figure on what the average homeowner's property increase will be next year?
So let's just go with 5.7, because that's the best I've got right now. So that's the overall change for properties. So what that means, though, is if you did a levy neutral, you're saying, okay, we're just going to get new property. What it means is our tax rate is going to go down by 5.7%. So it offsets it, right? Does that make sense? So the only way that the tax, so for the average property, the typical property would be their assessment valuation goes up by 5.7%, but Pima College's tax rate is going to go down, and the net would be zero for that perfect property. It doesn't work perfectly because neighbor A and neighbor B's assessment valuations go up slightly differently. So someone, so they don't see exactly the same thing.
What's your estimated benefit increase cost this next year?
So we have a benefits increase for health is a little over 2%. Really good news. Yeah, really good news. Yeah, it was good news. And we have some other benefits related costs that are going to go down. So we're planning on benefits costs will go down overall for the college. And that's partly going to help with and I'll explain that in a second, but that's going to help do the overall cost flat increase because a fair amount of that is coming on the benefits side. Public safety retirement system, we've been supplementing the amount that goes into public safety retirement system. We talked with the finance audit about this, and you're going to see this item on your next board agenda. We've been supplementing it very heavily, and we're making really good progress in terms of funding up the liability. So the recommendation is to decrease the additional amount, we're still going to be paying above and beyond what the contribution rates are, but to decrease how much extra we're paying will free up enough money, and that will make the overall cost for benefits go down, exclusive of taxes. So over the contract related benefit stuff.
So this may not be a question for you, maybe one for you. So I'm sure we have had conversations and studies on what are traditionally under-enrolled courses, over-enrolled courses. Who has that conversation, and where are we with that? Is there, do we say, okay, here's a traditionally last 5 years, this department has decreased in enrollment, and what we need to do is start dropping the offerings in that department or the department totally? Do we have that conversation, and where are we?
Yes. I think we're getting closer to having better conversations, but there's a model, right? This classroom funding model that is basically set up to have, and again, on average, it's 20 students in an on-site course classroom, 25 in an online. That is averaged out though, so like nursing doesn't get penalized and that they can't possibly hit their goals. So what happens is the units, the departments, or the disciplines are funded to have the adjunct faculty to hit the enrollment target that they have. And that enrollment target is also based on the number of students in a course. So a nursing would be expected, you want to hit at least 10 students in the course and what that means is for social science type courses, the expectation is probably ends up being closer to 27 to 30, something like that. So then when you're looking at how is enrollment going and you start breaking it down by discipline, you can start seeing where the fill rates aren't hitting what the expectations are. And the deans and department chairs, sort of an art and science of deciding the class go, no-go decision to hit those targeted averages. Historically, we are not hitting the averages. I will tell you that, by quite a bit.
That's not exactly the question. The question is, traditionally, departments that have courses or subjects that are decreasing over time on the number of sections that they're offering, at what point in time and who makes the decision that doesn't exist anymore?
So I think you're referring to gen ed courses. That's our bread and butter, right? And those are the ones that transfer to the university. So those are steady, but I think you may be referring to niche or boutique classes where they do diminish in enrollment. And so that's the conversation between the provost and the deans and department heads as to how many sections are open or not opened. So there is an assessment taking place currently, and discussions with each of the units that Nick Richmond has been having with ELT members, but also with academics. And we also see where there are opportunities of growth, such as cybersecurity. As we've heard, there's a request for more faculty, and in other areas that are more workforce related.
It might be nice to hear part of that conversation at some point in time. I'm just interested in how the conversation occurs. If we come back in another board meeting in March, and we set tuition, we set tax rates, we set all this, we then determine our revenue. Do we also determine how we're going to spend the additional revenue? And what is the role of shared governance and meet and confer when we're actually declaring the revenue that's available before they're finished with their conversations? I'm actually going somewhere with this. And I think what I, for one, would like to do is have an executive session item to discuss, meet and confer the status, what's being said, and also how that implicates our budget decisions.
Okay, so
In private, and then we can come out and do whatever we want to do in public. But this is getting pretty awkward for me because are we going to determine how much is available for raises at a step, at an increase, at fringe benefits, and then meet and confer goes and talks about it, and then comes back with us with a recommendation? I'm getting a little confused.
Let me walk you through where we're at. So the board's given some guidance, and we've had conversations with the meet and confer groups. The conversation is like, okay, we have a reality where the board is clearly expecting that we've got to be more efficient with our staffing size. The expectation, what we've talked about, that resistant to increasing tuition, resistance to increasing property tax, particularly without seeing some reductions in staffing size. In addition to that, so they know that the idea is the base that we'd be starting with is a year of experience, that anything above that would be set in a pool, kind of like what I'm talking about, that then it would be the conversation of that, what's the priority in terms of using that pool. So while I'm saying a 1% would be roughly a minimum increase of $1,000, that would be one judgment as to how that conversation could happen. I'm saying with some confidence that that would be received, it would be understood. There might be other priorities, though, that the groups and how they're talking about what the priorities are, that would be slightly different from that. And so it could be that they make a recommendation, well, we want the minimum increase to be slightly lower than that because we want to address, one of the conversations with faculty is the hourly, I don't remember, Chairperson Rial, you might remember what this is, the supplemental rate. The supplemental rate, which is for faculty who are off contract, if they do an hour of work, there's a rate that they get compensated for. It hasn't changed in a while. That's something that they're interested in looking at. So it'd be some balance potentially of those things. So what the board would do is then essentially give some guidance about, we would have a pool available, and then the conversations with the group would be, okay, this is what looks like it's available. What priorities would you see? And like I said, with some confidence, the minimum increase is probably up there because that is a pretty generally accepted way to deal with it when you have minimal increases.
If I could add also, we also have a program review process where divisions or departments supply data and inform other faculty who are part of a group and committee that look at their own data as to what programs are growing, what aren't. They talk to their advisory committees as well, who give them advice or say, you know, this is the class that we need and we need to add it or decrease it. So there is a model, a process in place already, in addition to what we've been talking about.
Do we still have the College Curriculum Council too? And they do that, don't they focus on some of those things too? And we've deactivated, I think, 2 courses or 2 programs in the last year here, if I remember right. It might have been an information item because it's not really popping out, but I think things like that do happen. So obviously, I just want to point out that math used to be the forerunner in courses taught. I'm not sure if that's still not the case. Do we know what the case, which one is like the leading enrollment?
Yeah, it'd be the communications division, but that incorporates, writing, foreign languages, etc.
Got it, communications division, writing, foreign languages, all of that, okay. Maybe I think increasing enrollment would once again help all of that, right? Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
So where do we go from here?
Did you want us to play the game?
If the board is interested in seeing different things and how it plays out to get to a different comfort level, that is what is, it's structured to do that. It also could be something that you take home and play with it, and then we have a conversation at the upcoming board meeting. What the challenge with that, though, timing-wise, would be when we set the recommendation for a tuition increase, we're going to have to be somewhat generic about how we set it because we won't know what to recommend, right? Because we don't have guidance to, we can make a recommend. Dolores and I can make a recommendation and then know that you guys can go in a different direction, and we would write the board report up such that that kind of flexibility would exist. That can be done.
Well, in regards to the process again, I'm not so sure I'm ready to look at the budget to come up with a pool of money. I'd rather have a conversation about what we want to be able to do and then go after the money.
Same, to me, it's 6 of one, half a dozen. Just start at the bottom and work your way up.
Well, to me, it's not, because I think in my first scenario, it's we want to be able to this, and this, not, and those are decisions based on steps and whatever, fringe benefits, things like that, staffing, class size, athletics, whatever it is, as opposed to what can we manipulate in the budget so we come up with a pot of money and then figure out how to spend the pot of money.
I'm going to say it slightly differently, what I said when I said 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. So if the idea is, okay, we want to address the structural deficit in athletics, we want to have a pool of money for strategic initiatives that's $500,000. We want to have a reduction of positions of a reasonable amount, so we're starting to make progress, but we want to do it through attrition. So you can plug those things in, and then looking at the bottom line, go, okay, where does that put us in terms of additional revenue that we might need? And then going, what would be the best revenue sources to get that from? That would be starting from the expense side. Now, what I'm saying is that we've kind of started that for you because we're saying, okay, well, the current year, we're going to do some cost reduction strategies. We're going to basically do the other things mostly the way we do them right now. That's the starting point. And we're going to address the structural problem that we have with athletic and performing arts. So it really is starting with the expense side and then going, okay, how do we balance that? Do we balance that by going, the last 2 things I would say is by reducing more positions, changing the number of positions you're planning to reduce, or by generating revenue through the 2 means that we really have to generate revenue to make it balance. Or super balance. Again, like I said, the last scenario was structurally getting the college to a better place so that we have surplus revenues that would enable us to do more strategic things.
And this is maybe what Wade was talking about, and you know, when we had this conversation last year, you know, I think I was talking about not letting the budget drive our strategic direction, but letting our strategic direction drive the budget. So and that's why I mean, Wade, maybe this is what you were saying, but forgive me if it's not, but where we start talking about pools of money to do things, the way I understand that when you say that is based on the pool of money that we decide sort of arbitrarily that might exist, then you all do what you can with that money. I would rather have you say, we need $500,000 to do these strategic initiatives. We're going to do A, B, and C. This is what we recommend. And then we approve the $500,000 to do that, as opposed to we approve some money and then somebody else divvies it up. And so that so in that way it's different for me when we're doing that. Or if like we approve this pool for additional minimum increases, but through meet and confer, they might decide, well, we're not going to do this amount of minimum increases. We're going to do this other thing. We're going to do this other thing. My preference would be finish that process. Let them recommend what they want to recommend. Bring it to us and say, this is what we're recommending. This is how much it would cost. And then we start doing this worksheet, as opposed to us allocating pools of dollars that then get allocated by somebody else. Because that seems like we don't have a frame of reference for that pool of dollars. We're just trying to make numbers add up. But I don't know if, when I talked before about like I was uncomfortable raising tuition or taxes, which I am still, the caveat I kept adding was unless you give me a really good reason. And so I'm waiting for the really good reason, and we need a pool of money to divvy up in my brain is not a really good reason, but we need X amount for Y thing is a good reason.
One of the challenges, I think, is that there's an unlimited number of good things we can do with money, ranging from better managing deferred maintenance, which is unromantic to the nth degree, to $30 million for a public safety building, or the debt service related to that, something like that. It is literally unlimited what things we could do. So that the idea is starting with the base assumption that, okay, keep doing what we're doing, and then on the edge, address some of the things that seem to be strategic priorities, and then having conversations. It's not like the college can't do that. That's how we did the revenue bonds, right? It was, okay, we have a strategic plan that says we want to build some new buildings. How are we going to go do that? And then that gets folded into the budget. More in a decision that's more upfront than how you're perceiving this is all playing out. This is a sort of keep doing what you're doing, and then on the edge do some things that you'd like to do model. I mean, it will always be that way until there's a big set of priorities, like the revenue bond priorities, the buildings, which are bigger, or some other key initiatives, right? I mean, like I said, it ranges from, you know, you could do all kinds of things. You could say, we want to have 1-for-1 instruction in 150 classes, or you could do, and then go, how do you fold that in, and what's that going to cost? There could be all sorts of things like that. But mostly the challenge is that we're a public entity that has fairly restricted revenues, and we've got a timing that is like each year there are certain things that have to happen. It isn't that the college doesn't think strategically. It isn't that these things aren't coming up. It's that right now, one of the things that we're doing is catching up for the strategic decisions through the centers of excellence and making sure those things happen, and then operationally move through, knowing that we have enrollment is down significantly, we're inefficiently structured, we need to reallocate resources. That's all a challenge. All of that's all sort of built into it stays the same. Well, staying the same doesn't mean we're not doing a lot of things. It just means you're not doing big and interesting priorities. Those sort of come in different ways and then get folded in, go, okay, it's time, let's go build a new building, let's do this, let's do that, how are we going to do that? And that takes a little bit of time and a little forethought. This is more like the nuts and bolts, less sexy stuff, I guess. But it doesn't mean that we're not making good, important, smarter decisions and making, that's why the stuff on the increments, it's like, we are reducing positions, we are more effectively setting up our operating structure.
I think Greg and I are awfully close to being on the same page. You all live this every day, and it would be nice to hear you tell us what your initiatives should be, your top priorities in spending. I would like to hear things like, we're having significant problems recruiting faculty, so we need to bump their salaries. Or, this debt service that we're paying is not a good thing, we need to take care of part of that. Or, and go on and on and on. Day-to-day business, I don't understand what the priorities should be, but I'm more than willing to vote on changing allocations in budgets or whatever statutory responsibility I have in order to make the institution function consistent with what the leadership says.
Okay, so I want to clarify. There are a couple of things you said there that's like, okay, yeah, we're doing that. So if we need to pay certain positions more and the class comp structure identifies, yes, that's merited, we're having a problem hiring, we don't need to go back to the board to do that. Operationally, we can figure out mechanisms, and we have mechanisms in place to do that. What happens, though, is that then gets folded into this boring budget, right? And the sort of the increased costs that we might have for having additional costs for hard-to-fill faculty or something like that. I wouldn't, that's not a strategic decision to me. That is, okay, you've got to do what you got to do. I mean, I'm not saying I make it on my own. I'm saying the mechanisms in place identify that we need to invest more in aviation faculty, or right now the department chair structure is in the works. That may have additional costs in it. It's not going to be something that on the side we need to come back to the board on. It's something that it's like, yeah, I'm not saying it wouldn't go to the board. I'm saying the budget would be structured to either have to absorb that, or we would fold it in the next year, and then I would say to you, as you guys all talked about last year, we're adding additional money to fund up that particular type of faculty. Like, so that's on the smaller dollar end of the spectrum. Again, something big like a building would be more obvious.
So in those scenarios that you outlined then, would I understand it correctly that the third one is essentially interim chancellor and then your recommendation in terms of a budget that would address your current priorities, which include the structural deficit that we have, and then wanting to make sure we have enough dollars to move forward with the types of increases and things to pay competitively, all of that.
And I might say that some of the things I'd say, I said there's an unlimited number of things. Some of those are things that are good, right? Deferred maintenance. It's like, yeah, it's hard to sell it because it's like, oh, no one wants to do that, but you've got to do it. So if we set the budget structure up better, it gives us more resources to be able to make and adapt to those kinds of things as they come up.
If I may add a comment, perhaps we could strategize on 5 to 7 priorities as possible initiatives. Dave, I don't know what you think about that, and then go from there.
I mean, yes, but I think that what I could do is probably just go through even, off the cuff right now and say things that you guys just were talking about. So addressing the structural deficit in athletics, like that is a strategic decision. I've sort of said how to do it, and it's like, yeah, there's semantics on how you say it, but that's like clearly from my standpoint, that is my recommendation to the board. We need to address the structural deficit we have. It's creating problems, and it's only going to get worse. So it has a series of recommendations related to it. Happy to sort of put those forward as priorities, like including it is a priority to give people another year of experience. It's not a requirement. We don't have to do that. That's our recommendation of something that I think is a base smart thing to do. Dolores, I think, would agree with that. And we've talked about that one, right? So that's not news. The different things, other different things, like when it comes down to it, at the end, it's also how many positions are you reducing? And the deeper you go, the harder it's going to be for the institution. So creating a healthy balance to that is somewhat of a strategic decision. And how we play that out, whether you do it through attrition and you have it through a period of time, that's also kind of strategic. It, again, is not sexy. It's not anything lovely. But none of this would say that we can't do normal small dollar things that are important and strategic in addressing current needs. This budget doesn't have the ability to do something like build a giant building.
Yeah, so I guess what I just in my thinking, and when you talk about there being an infinite number of possibilities, I agree. And so my question back would be, as senior leadership of the college, my hope is that you're filtering those infinite number of possibilities, and what you're bringing to us as a recommendation is, yeah, we could do an infinite number of things, but these are the 10 things we need to do, whatever number it is. These are the 10 things we need to do next year, and this is the budget that's going to allow us to do it, which is why we're recommending it. But if I'm understanding that correctly, that's the third one that you presented, right?
I think that's the best model, yes. But I know the board is hesitant on the tuition and the tax increases, and I do think that creating a slightly healthier budget would be good. The reason why is when we implemented class comp, the estimates for how much that was going to cost to implement were a little low. So we have absorbed a pretty big increase in class and compensation the last couple of years. It's all for good things. It's all for good reasons. But structurally, we're on the edge. And the big challenge is that with all the building that we're doing, all the big capital projects we're doing, that operational change that we absorbed is not as obvious. If we were not doing any buildings at the time, you'd be like, oh, wait, things got worse. And things got worse. So structurally, this would set us up to be in a healthier place long-term. It's not anything that I'd say you need to worry about. I just think that it would be a good reset to get ourselves structurally a little bit healthier. And that scenario C or the third scenario is a better version. The other thing is that, like, the recommendations on compensation. If the employee's expectation, I'm just going to throw numbers to whatever. If there was so much pressure that people were like, we need a 10% increase, for us to turn around and go, yeah, you get a year of experience and maybe a minimum increase would be misaligned. If that kind of pressure was out there, and again, that isn't for anyone who's hearing me, that doesn't mean I don't hear that you want more, I get it. But I'm saying, if there was pressure like that, the recommendation would be to have higher compensation increases up front. Like, it'd be like, okay, no, it's just, we did big compensation increases, and right now the issue is we have too many staff for the size of our enrollment. And so the idea is, okay, let's take the size of the enrollment or the size of the staffing down in a healthy, non-painful way, and then be able to address the other issues as in a normal course of business.
So the last question, just in the vein of strategy driving the budget, not budget driving the strategy. So I understand why there's that line in the spreadsheet around staffing reductions in terms, because that's what you need to do to make the math work, right? But I worry in doing it that way, because let's say it's with the 22s on the screen, so we'll just say it's 22, because we would need 22 to level out that budget. Are we overstaffed by 22 people, or are we overstaffed by 30, or are we overstaffed by 10?
Okay.
And so how does the actual reality of it factor into the...
We're overstaffed by way more than 20. So the thought behind this, first of all, you're looking at it and you're saying, yeah, it's a plug number, and I sort of said that. It isn't really a plug number, because if we weren't talking about, if we hadn't did all the lead in based on the metrics of how many staff versus benchmarks versus our historical norms, if we hadn't had all of those conversations before now, that wouldn't be a normal line. That's not a normal line. If you go back 4 years, there's not a line, well, because there was a time when we were reducing. I may have gone too far, but if, 3 years ago, you wouldn't have seen that number as a plug line. It's not a standard plug line. That's a plug line that's acknowledging the fact that by all the metrics and the benchmarking and the conversations we've had, we are overstaffed for the size of our enrollment. So let's ratchet that down. And when you guys, if you get time to play with it, one of the things that I did, so I put in some little color codings in there where if you put in numbers that are too big, it starts flagging out that that's probably too big. 75 to reduce by 75 in a year, not likely. We've shown you some of the retention numbers, but attrition numbers over time, and the attrition numbers that were expected due to normal retirements. So normal attrition is about 150 positions a year. So if you said that we're going to reduce by more than 75, say, I just picked that number, but that's half, right, of what our normal attrition is. That's saying that we are expecting in the budget that half of the positions that go vacant this year, we are going to close. That's going to put a fair amount of pressure on the college, right? Because we're not picking the positions. We're going, retirements happen, we're only filling half of them. Well, a lot of retirements that happen, you have to fill the position. So if you just are ballparking half, that's a fair amount of pressure. And so going above that would be uncomfortable. 20 positions, we should be doing that every year.
So for what it's worth, in terms of feedback that we can factor in here, so I feel like that still doesn't get to where because if the amount of positions that would be reduced is based on people who are retiring from those positions, that's still an arbitrary, because someone's retiring from that position doesn't mean that we need or don't need the position. What I'm asking is, when or where is the analysis being done of all of the existing positions to decide whether that position is necessary or not, regardless of whether it's vacant or not?
So we've shown you information about sort of the college's metrics. The number is way more than 150. The college's financial structure is not dire to the point where I'm saying, let's go deep to what the metrics say. Let's go back to the staffing levels that we were at in 2014, like proportionately to the size of the enrollment. That would necessitate something like layoffs. And layoffs can be more strategic in the sense that you can identify what positions you think you can do without. What I'm saying is that the recommendation would be through attrition. You then know that you're expected to, in a given year, reduce by a certain number of positions. Everybody, all the executives will have an idea of what does that mean for your area? It's not going to be proportional. It's going to be sort of split because it's going to be heavier on the enrollment side, on the things that are more student related. For example, the number of positions needed in facilities does not get changed at all by the number of enrollments you have. It's zero, right? It's based on the size of your facilities and the square footage that you have to cover and the deferred maintenance issues you've got going on and all that sort of thing. So the idea with this would be, okay, we're not in a dire situation. We're in a situation where we know we're overstaffed. So through natural attrition, let's start planning how to be better about the positions. Look at what retirements you might have and go, how would you absorb that workload? How would you reorganize your unit to cover that sort of and be able to reduce over time, but not be so, it's certainly not intended to be this person leaves and they're doing something super critical to the college and then the college falls apart because the one position you need is not being filled. That's not the idea. The idea is, okay, that one needs to be filled. So that means that maybe you have to do 2 others over here when they become vacant, because then you figure out how to restructure and reorganize to continue to do the good service, the good work that we do without falling apart. So it's going to take some doing, but I hate it because it sounds like when you allow it through attrition, that is not strategic. It is if you're actually thinking ahead and you're saying, okay, well, on average, you're going to lose, you're going to have this many people leaving your unit. How are you going to constantly think about reorganizing or changing the work duties so that you can not only handle that person leaving, but then reduce the positions and the burden on the institution? That's the idea. And it's going to need to be done over time.
When are we going to start talking about PSESI? Because it sounds like, if we need a new building, is that an option that we can just plug that in? Or is that something that we're going to have to do more discussion? I mean, do you understand what I'm saying?
Sort of. In terms of identifying that, yes, we want to do that, the conversation is, I think that there's some conversations and there's some proposals and ideas that have to be decided by the board. Say the board decides it. Then it would be, okay, and how do you fund it? So then Then I come up and I go, here are the different ways we can do that. The timing of it, what I would generally say is that if we do a big building, the next set of big building projects, we have enough that we probably have to do around the college, we should start thinking about a geo bond. Then you're starting to talk about planning for something 2 to 3 years out before you're actually going to the voters, because you have to go to the voters for that. The benefit of revenue bonds is the college maintains the ability to do that. We have capacity to do that. I'm not sure that that would be the best thing to do for a singular building at this point. It was a thing that it made a lot of sense when we did the revenue bonds. We have some capacity to do some more that way. But if we were to decide to build PSESI without thinking about also having money available to reorganize other things at the college, to deal with some renovations or deferred maintenance that's happening, what my worry is that we did one shiny project and neglected a whole bunch of other stuff. And then you're going to be like, this is a 5 to 10 years out problem that you now have a 5 to 10 years out problem. So we need to start really thinking if there is a lot of interest in doing a couple of big capital projects, let's start talking about that, figuring out what big capital projects are particularly interesting, and then talk about how would we do that, whether it's geo bonds, and if it's geo bonds, then okay, let's go around the college and figure out what major other deferred maintenance projects we want to include in that, because you don't want to go out to the voters for 1.5 buildings or something like that.
So I heard you say 3 to more years. I think PSESEI needs to move soon. You know, that was all of the talk that they're outgrowing that building where they currently are. And so I think we'd be proactive to start having this discussion and get going on that whole idea instead of waiting for a couple of years to start the conversation.
So it's sort of to clarify a little bit. So the initial idea with PSESI was that there was money in the revenue bonds project. It was a fairly small amount of money to do some renovations and to create some space from currently existing space. That morphed into a state-of-the-art, high-profile facility. I'm not judging one way or the other. I'm just saying the difference is there was a plan to do something relatively short-term that turned into something much more significant. The much more significant is, from a resource standpoint, significantly more difficult to do. If we do that, then it's like, okay, now that's significantly, and also let's throw out there, we've got the Drachman properties and what to do with that. That's going to cost money one way or the other. Some may not be a lot, but some would cost, and up to, and then more recently you've heard of another idea related to cybersecurity facility that would be another high profile thing. Again, now you're talking about if you did say those 3 things, easy to say. Again, we're talking, I think these are super fancy. I don't think it needs to be 30 million, but say 30 million, 30 million, and 10. Now you're talking $70 million. That's geo bonds. And then you're talking, okay, what else needs to be done around the college? Now you're really talking geo bonds, and it's probably over 100 million. And I wouldn't do a geo bond if you're not talking about 100 million plus for the size of our institution. It's just too hard to go out to get it all prepped. And then so if that's the leaning and that's how we want to go, do it comprehensively. We have multiple needs we have to do, which is what the major planning efforts are. Then you go, okay, let's plan out when and how we're going to do that. Revenue bonds won't be sufficient to get them all done. We could do it. It would get, you'd get a fair chunk of money. We could probably get, interest rates aren't what they used to be. I feel like an old man. Wow, back in my day. Back a few years ago, interest rates were really reasonable. They're not so much now. So the cost of borrowing money for revenue bonds, when it's revenue bonds, it'd be more impactful in the college. Downsides are also, revenue bonds are tied to enrollment because they're tied to tuition and contract. It's not property tax related. So our enrollment is down. We're already leveraged some of our capacity for revenue bonds. It means that, suddenly we're not quite as attractive because we're more heavily leveraging off of one revenue source, as opposed to geo bonds where it's like super good credit because it's the taxpayers have voted for it. So at this point, if you're going to do 1 to 2 big projects, which I think is where things are heading, then you have to start thinking it's the really big thing. I've taken a bit more than an hour, it appears.
It's not a question, it's a comment. If we initiate in reference to 2 or 3 new initiative in reference to building more, I think the other thing that we need to do is not only as a board, but inform the public as well too. Because they're the one that needs to be engaged on our projects as well too. But one of the things I was thinking, it's nothing new, is we really need to, as Pima has done, promote it, but also engage the private sectors. I think not only locally, but outside as well too, because I think if I've always said, and everybody here on the board has said, that the investment that we do now is for the investment of the future, and I think that's I like the idea, but one of the big things that we all have to look at, and you mentioned it quite a few times, is the enrollment. I think the enrollment is a big factor. I know that sometimes we can do more if we will have more students, but also I think we need to somehow bring the students as well too. But I do like the idea that as a board we need to sit down, and yourself and everybody that needs to hear this, put it on the table. What is more conducive? What is more cost effective? What can we do within the 3 years or 4 years or 5 years? Because things are going to change in the next 6 months or so in reference to coming back to the re-election. We might have 3 new board members and see what other ideas they have as well too. But I just want to make a comment. I think if we do anything, we put it on the table, but let the community be informed. Because I think it's a good idea, a lot of good ideas, but the big thing is the enrollment that we have, and we really need to make it a top priority on that.
I think I totally agree, and one of the challenges, but advantages to GeoBonds is that you have to engage the community and show the vision of what you're doing and get them to buy into the idea, and that they like the vision and they support the vision financially. That's the big advantage of GeoBonds. And the downside to revenue bonds is that you can sort of do it. We did it certainly with the public being aware, but the board has more authority with revenue bonds to do a project that the board is just interested in. It doesn't have to have as much community engagement in it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome, thank you.
And now we're on to the second interim chancellor's mid-year review of her goals.
Yes, thank you, Board Chair. Good evening, or I guess it's not quite evening yet, almost. So what I'd like to do before we start with a review of the interim chancellor's goals is I'd like to give you an update on the strategic plan institutional target update. I believe you have received data on that. So these slides take highlights from the data you received over the weekend. So as part of the strategic plan, we've established 2 institutional goals. And the institutional goal is Achieve 60 Pima County. Everybody's familiar with Achieve 60 Arizona. But for Pima County, it's by 2030, 60% of Pima residents aged 25 to 64 will hold a post-secondary credential or degree. So if we go on to the next slide, please. We see progress on the institutional target 1, which is increased completer counts by 6,000 by 2024-2025. And if we go to the next slide, we see the target 2, double completer counts of Hispanic or Latino, American Indian, Alaska Native, and Black and African American learners by 2024-2025. So here we're looking at American Indian and Alaska Native completers. And you can see that there has been a decrease. If you look at the next one. Next slide, please. We have Black or African American completers. You can see the trend there, and I'll explain what are some of why we think this is taking place right now. Next slide, please, where we look at Hispanic Latino completers. And next slide, please. Sorry, before I go into that, we believe that some of this decrease has to do with the pandemic. We had students that had a learning loss and did not come to the institution. We've been seeing an increase recently about that. Another is what we need to do is examine our policies and practices through data analysis and looking at the inequities. Examining also our student transfer experience, making sure students are getting on planners and collaborating with the universities. We're looking at culturally responsive curriculum, holistic support services to students, increasing dual enrollment, student transition to the college. We're in the process of restructuring Pima Online, and also program review that's data informed, as I mentioned earlier in Dave's presentation. So one example of what we're doing something positive regarding this is through Pima College's Excelencia in Education. And Excelencia in Education accelerates Latino student success, enhancing workforce leadership and the economy. So here's some bullet points. We have the partnership, and we also have, I also belong to, as a founding member of the statewide Arizona HSI Consortium. I'll be co-presenting at the AZ Transfer Summit regarding HSI, state-based HSI consortium's models for developing communities of practice. So it's not only a Pima team, but also statewide. We're partnering with the University of Arizona on other HSI initiatives. For example, we'll be hosting this year the 2024 HSI Grants Development Institute with the U of A. We are training and having professional development opportunities for faculty for culturally responsive pedagogy. We're also working at the Desert Vista campus in April. We'll be holding a partnership for English and Spanish first-generation parent sessions, because I personally believe that education is a family decision, and the more parents are involved and participating with their children, the more access and the more promotion of their children to complete is evident. We're increasing HSI grants and at the institution, so we have 3 different grants: Strive Online, Title V grant that helps serve our Pima Online students. The East Campus has an HSI STEM IT Knowledge and Context project, and also Pima and U of A have a STEM Bridge project. We're also intentionally diversifying our job applicant pools. So, and we're also promoting jobs in Excelencia in Education. So this is just one example of what we're doing to help with the institutional targets of the institution. Now I'd like to continue with the actual goals, and I've asked for the goal owners to join me in giving a brief update on each of their goals and sub-goals. So there are a couple of people who weren't able to join us today, but we do have, for our first goal, we will continue with Jeff Tees on accreditation, preparing the college for the accreditation assurance argument. And we can close the slides. Thank you.
Good evening, Chairperson Real, board members, Interim Chancellor Duran Cerda, colleagues and guests. So, Chancellor Goal 1 progress. As you've seen in the past, we're making great progress on this particular goal. There's 3 main components to this goal. The first was the additional locations work that started last summer and worked through the fall. The second is the creation of what we call our assurance argument. So that's the big report that has the different components in it. And then the last is just preparing all of us for the visit that's coming in December of 2024. So with respect to the additional locations, we had completed all of that work, so that segment of it's 100% done. However, there's been additional work that we've recognized, and so we created a task force in the fall that's been working through the fall and early in the spring to create an administrative procedure so the challenges we were faced with last spring don't happen again. So we'll have an administrative procedure and standard operating procedure that goes with that as well. Additionally, we are looking at tying our additional locations to our branch campuses. We have a branch campus report that's part of this work as well, and so making sure we have a clear process for identifying our additional sites and how they connect to our various branch campuses. So the assurance argument, we are about a little over halfway done with the assurance argument. If you've been to any of our town halls or if you've looked on the website, we have the 5 criterion, plus we have the federal compliance. Those 6 have gone through the whole phase of being reviewed, absorbing the comments, collecting that information, making edits. So we're really close to saying that those chapters are very close to being finished. Once we're ready to pull those all together and give it a single voice, we'll be doing that here and plan to have that full report done by May of 2024. The other components that we're still working through that are part of that larger report are the embedded reports. So we have an embedded report. We have 2 embedded reports. One's the additional locations, the other one's for ODR. Those are due in the end of March, the first drafts of those. So they'll go through that same cycle of review and updates as well moving forward. And then last is just preparation. We had the pre-mock visit back in December. Since then, we have created like short, multiple page kind of Q&A type documents for different levels of the institution. We have ones for the board. I know you all have had that and have started having meetings where we actually review that information as well. Leadership prep sessions for the visit. Monthly town halls, we have one coming up in March on the 14th, Pi Day, 2 to 8 at West Campus. I believe that's our last one. Let's see, there was one more piece. Just in general, kudos to Wendy Weeks for leading this effort. She's done an incredible job. If you've been to the town halls, there's a lot of people supporting that effort. Faculty, staff, administrators, part of the writing teams, part of the town hall visits, and part of the preparation for the next visit. That was the last one. So September, we have the mock visit, right? We did the pre-mock in December. Friday, September 6th, we will have the regular mock visit in preparation for the December visit from HLC. Any questions?
How are we doing with the HLC concerns regarding dual enrollment?
The HLC concerns, so that comes through the additional locations. So we had visits all at the end of last summer and early spring, and part of the additional site location. So dual enrollment's a major part of the additional sites, but we also have through workforce other additional sites. So think prisons, or if we're out of business, those types of things. So we have an AP that's getting created, but in the intermediate, we're also creating, we've also been doing administrative visits. So either myself, Michael Parker, our Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, or Morgan Phillips, our Vice Chancellor for Academic Excellence, are going around and visiting every high school that we have a dual enrollment partnership with, along with James and his team. And we're having this strategic conversation. Not the, hey, I need this for the fall, or hey, I need this, to happen real soon. That's kind of James and his team's work. What we're doing in the Provost's office is having a strategic view is, where do you want to see dual enrollment at your particular site? Does that mean we need to create you as an additional site? Because that's something we have to do through HLC. And we're really trying to have that pathways conversation. Today, I was out at Santa Rita High School visiting with their principal and the CTE director for TUSD, along with their team, to have those conversations about, we're going to have this new AJEC, right, in 2 years. So fall of 26, what they recall as our AJEC, or our Arizona Gen Ed curriculum, is going to be changing. So the tweaks that happen there, how does that reflect in what we do with dual enrollment? HLC has shifted the faculty qualifications, and so we have an internal group that's working led by Kate Schmidt and faculty, to look at our faculty qualifications process, because HLC has tweaked theirs enough where that provides us with the opportunity to take a second look at the processes we follow to see if there's opportunities to increase the value of teachers that are out there that can teach for us, adjunct faculty, full-time faculty, or through dual enrollment.
Are you getting cooperation from the sites?
Yes, absolutely.
So when I attended the first town hall last August, I noticed that they had, each of those groups had quite a few things that they needed the college to fix, address, you know, whatever. And when I went to the one last week here, I noticed, I didn't stay for the whole meeting. I've been to all of them, but I didn't stay for, except for that first day for the whole thing. But I noticed that the questions, many of the questions that they asked, the items that they needed in August are still information they need now. And so my question was, why haven't you got those answers yet from the college, from the administration? And what I was told, that was for the first one, for the federal compliance, what I was told, well, it is in the process, and some of these answers will be due in April and some will be due in August. So what Wade just asked you, this is a long thing, right? When HLC comes to us and they say, what do you know about the extra sites, right? If we haven't been told, and we in enough advance so we can sink into our brains, right? We're all old up here, so it takes more than one. Well, not
Sorry,
you,
Greg.
not Greg, but he's got children, so he's the same boat as us. He needs time to absorb all of this stuff, right? And so my question is, if we actually wait until April or May or August to fix these things, and then you're expecting all of us to be everybody, right, at the college, everybody needs to be able to answer these questions. So my suggestion is, I'm encouraging everybody to maybe up your deadlines instead of, you know, finishing it all in April or in August. Let's try to finish it a lot sooner than that, so we can start understanding what's happening.
Absolutely, and I'll take that back, and we'll work with the different groups to oversee the different criteria. I know one of the pieces is we've actually created several new APs, and they're going through our AP process, and so that might be where the April dates are coming from. You know, they go through the governance process, and then they get reviewed, legal sends them out for the 21 days and all that, so there is a little bit of time on those. But the other evidence pieces we'll follow up on as well, because you're right. You don't want to be not knowing at the mock visit the things you should already know and have to get all of this information flooded at you at once. It should be scaffolded. As soon as we have it, we should be getting it in your hands, and we'll work on that.
There are some APs that were submitted just recently, a whole bunch of them, so we're getting caught up.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Jeff. So next, we're going to talk about the second goal, which is increasing enrollment. And since Phil Burdick couldn't join us today, Dr. Irene Robles-Lopez will be providing that quick update.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. So what Phil wanted to share with you all is here is a snapshot of the recruitment goals. So he does have the percentages of what he was looking at for first day enrollment and head count, the 3% increase for 24-25 fall applications being completed, fall yield percentage, which would actually be application to registration, and then of course fall dual enrollment student increases as well. And so that's just a snapshot of what his goals are for recruitment. Next slide, please. And so with that, we see that student applications, if we look back at fall 21, fall 22, and fall 23, fall 21, there was a 1% decrease in student applications. In fall 22 and fall 23, there has been an increase in student applications, which is positive. Over looking at first day fall enrollment, we do see that over those last 5 terms, there has been an increase in enrollment. And so part of what I wanted to share that's not part of Phil's slides is this really has been through collaboration through several units across the college, working together to make sure that we are creating the best experience for students when they walk onto the campus, when they go through the enrollment process, and then the registration process as well. So we do have a first-year experience for our students as they come into the college. That would be their onboarding. It's the same as their new student orientation. We make sure that they connect with their program advisor, that they're getting to see a familiar face. And so with that, it's several units across the college, along with our Super Saturday events, that really focus on making sure that we're there for students, we're able to answer their questions. So that part has to do specifically with enrollment. Another aspect that we're looking at and making sure that we're retaining our students is some of the other work that we're doing. So right now we have 2 initiatives, 2 pilot programs that we are working on. And so one of them is the First Generation Student Initiative. Right now, with the data that we have, approximately 30% of our students are first generation students. We know that oftentimes these students don't have the context for being able to maneuver through college, the expectations, what about if they have questions, what about if they run into any challenges. So we have an initiative where we are specifically focusing on them. That is done through the Garcia Grant, which is a grant that we received 2 years ago. We're going into year 3 through the League of Innovation in collaboration with them. We also have another initiative, which is the Male Minority Initiative. As we saw in the data for Achieve 60 Arizona, that is a population where we know that we're having a bit more in a challenge in getting them to come to the college and then helping us retain them. So we also have an initiative focused on specifically reaching out to those students, helping them make a connection, and really helping create a sense of belonging. And so with that, it leads into goal 3, which is the one that I oversee. Yeah, do you have any questions? I'm sorry. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I'm wondering if we have a big emphasis on minority recruitment, and do we have any information on the impact of dual enrollment as it pertains to those students not enrolling in Pima College as a full-time student in Gen Ed? The kids that are going to walk out of high school with an associate arts degree or equivalent aren't going to go to Pima, and we don't get any tuition from those students. And are we shooting ourselves in the foot because we're allowing them to get a degree from the institution without paying for it? And is that had a negative impact on our enrollment? Just a question.
Thank you. That's an excellent question. I don't know if Jeff Tees would like to answer that, or our chancellor.
Just Jeff, just give us an interim answer.
An acting answer?
Interim.
Interim. Oh, okay. So one of the greater challenges is actually the university's adjustments to who they go down and grab, right? So they're now looking to capture students they would have not have brought in the past to meet that need. So the majority of our dual enrollment students are capturing anywhere from 9 to 12 credits. So we have very few that actually complete their full associate's degree with us. So I don't think it's a challenge yet. I think if you expand models like the early college high school, which isn't quite the same because Vail does have a different partnership because that's co-enrolled instead of dual enrolled, that may be a challenge. But that is one of the conversations we're having as we visit. If they want the full AJEC course block, which is the general ed curriculum, about 36 credits that automatically transfer to the U of A, that will be one of those pieces we'll have to be looking at. Are we losing that group? They've got the gen ed block through dual enrollment, and now they can go straight into the university and not have to worry about that gen ed piece. We're not getting the numbers there yet where the students have that many credits. A lot of high schools still have a blended AP dual enrollment approach. Going back to the kind of the minority piece of it, the increase of our dual enrollment, especially in high schools that are more predominantly minority students, has actually helped support those students to go to college. And so we think the win is more on that end right now at this point. We're getting more of them involved in college in high school, and thus they decide that that is something they want to pursue, right? They've said, look, I can be successful at this college thing, maybe I will go on, is that capture rate there is the greater amount at this point. But it is a concern long-term if you ramp it up and do it so well, you're not capturing any tuition from that group.
So I'm going to assume that two of the most popular dual enrollment courses are in English and math.
Yep.
And
Comp
so
1, Comp 2, and
we all automatically
College
lose
algebra.
that tuition when those students would have been first-year Pima College students after they graduate from high school.
absolutely.
So I'd be, well, an aside is if did you call it AJAC?
Yeah,
Gets
the AJAC.
rewritten, and those students are in high school AP classes that are getting dual enrollment credit, what's that curriculum going to look like? Because the AP curriculum is much different than the high school curriculum. It's probably much different than the community college curriculum. So how are you?
Yeah, so the AP is exactly like you said, and so that's the conversation high schools are having internally, right? Do we offer AP in composition, or do we offer dual enrollment? If they offer dual enrollment, they're using our curriculum. If they're offering AP, obviously they're using the AP curriculum. The big change is they don't have to pay for dual enrollment, and if they earn a grade, that grade sticks. They take AP, they got to go pay to take a test, although the district might cover it. I think TUSD does a lot of that. But if they don't pass it, oftentimes to retake it, they're going to pay for it. If they do pass it, the institution they go to may not accept it. If they earn a 3 out of 5 or a 4 out of 5, it all depends on the receiving institutions, the value they place on that. So we are seeing more high schools are moving away from the AP and towards the dual credit, the dual.
Nationwide, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's more of a issue than just celebrating our dual enrollment, that we have to really dive down and take a look at what the impact is.
The capture rate, how many of them come to Pima, is a big piece, because that's where you are going to recruit, any losses plus the community good that it does for them to complete.
Thank you. So Irene is going to continue with Goal 3, Enhancing a Culture of Care, and she is the goal owner for this one.
Thank you. And so with this particular goal, again, looking at enhancing the culture of care for students, for our employees, really for the Pima community. And so with the most recent survey that was sent out, which was a community student survey, there were 42,000 emails that were sent out. And so you can also see how the percentage, 13,000, 32% opened the email, 300, which is approximately 5%, clicked through it, indicating that they interacted with the survey but didn't necessarily complete the survey. And then we did have 200 people that actually completed that survey. So that data will be looked at, it will be analyzed to see what feedback it is that we're getting from folks that would help improve enhancing the culture of care. We also have identified or selected a diversity, equity, and inclusion survey of employees. And so that one will run along with the college employee satisfaction survey, which is usually done every 3 to 4 years. So that will be another part of that process. And all of the surveys and analysis will be completed by May of this semester. The next phase after the surveys is our listening sessions. And so this is something that's really important to us because we want to hear from folks. We want to know exactly what it is that they're thinking, what it is that they would like for us to know. And so with that, we are offering 3 different sessions. And so we try to differ the times, the days. All of them are identical. All will be virtual. Again, trying to be as flexible as possible to have as many people participate. And so folks are welcome to attend any of them. And so really the goal for these sessions are for us to listen, to reflect, collaborate, gather, and flourish. And so with that, again, it's that positive intent, it's welcoming the feedback from individuals. And so we do have the dates there. You all are welcome. We do have the Zoom links. We didn't include them in here because it took up a little bit too much space. But if you didn't receive that and would like to join, we'd be more than happy to be able to share that with you. And so at this point, the completion rate for this goal is at 33%. And so the actual plan for the goal is at 100%, but the implementation part of it is at 33%. And so again, we are on track to have this completed and are really looking forward to hearing and seeing the feedback that we get from folks. Does anyone have any questions?
No, thanks, but I'm just interested in knowing, not right now, but I'm looking forward to seeing what you asked, what kind of questions you ask.
Yes.
Because what you ask determines what kind of answers you'll get, so that'd be, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene. And for our final one, and I think you've received a bit of the budget explanation earlier today, but we have the improve effectiveness and with Dr. Dave B. And I believe Nick Richmond is also joining us online, virtually.
She's certainly available. Good evening again. We spent a fair amount of time talking about budget development and cost savings ideas. Some of the things are spelled out a little bit more in this report, some of the different cost savings ideas, and think about those. Those aren't just for this coming year, those are for the next few years and identifying different things that we'll be talking about, exploring, and so forth. So with that, I'll ask if the board has any questions. I know that we've already talked ad nauseum about these things for an hour and 40 minutes. And I presented to you last week, so there you go. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Dave. And I did forget Ian Rourke, because Ian was going to present as part of the enrollment goal.
All right.
Apologize for that.
Good evening, Board Chair, Governing Board members present and virtual, Chancellor Duran-Cerda, colleagues, guests, including those watching virtually. Goal 2B is a subset of the primary Goal 2 that Irene talked about on behalf of our colleague Phil Burdick, and then also her role in that. Goal 2B really focuses on, is a subset of a strategic plan goal that extends into 2025 under our current strategic plan, that also helps better position the institution to meet the needs of adult learners and new majority learners in the community. As people are living longer and working longer and changing jobs more often, we can also be that place where people return to time and time again for the education and training that they want to better improve their family and household lives and have new opportunities for gainful employment in our growing labor market. There's a number that I'm going to talk about that's a macro number that troubles me every day I see it, or every day I think about it, or look it up to see if it's changed. And that is the labor force participation rate in Pima County. In the history of our country and the history of the county, back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, labor participation rates were upwards of 80, 70%. And then we saw drastic declines starting in the mid-90s, then with the Great Recession, a collapse. And labor force participation rate in the United States of America is at the lowest point that it's ever been. This is not the unemployment rate. These are people who have been out of work for 1 year or longer who could be working between the ages of 25 and 64. In Pima County, it is now at a historical low of 58%. That means 58% of the people who could be working are chronically long-term unemployed. The new models for new majority learners that we talk about in this strategic initiative are targeted to address that population and others. How do we give people real systems and processes through our programming that offers the same high-quality programming that are taught by our faculty in our programs, at our campuses, and in our centers of excellence, but in a way, as Chancellor Duran-Cerda and Chancellor likes to say, the institution is orienting around their needs. We are becoming more learner-friendly. There are many different models that we can scale and launch, and many of these things have been occurring as add-ons for some years. But the three that were targeted in the strategic plan goal are the iBest program through adult basic education for college and career. That is where individuals who have not earned their high school diploma take both a CTE workforce program and earn their GED at the same time, not one after another. They are co-enrolled and have co-instruction. The second is work-based learning up into and including apprenticeship, and we want to see more what's called related technical instruction coming out of apprenticeship. Not to get too into the weeds unless questions are asked about it, but in order for something to be a registered apprenticeship at the state or the federal level, enrollment in a college program as part of that training regimen is actually required by the federal government. And there are employer benefits related to that. The goal specifically here is that sometimes learners will come to us even with an apprenticeship, but we did not have a way to know if they were coming to us because of the requirement of their apprenticeship or they were just generally enrolling. So that's the second one that we've targeted for scalability. The third, and the one that seems to have the most stickiness, if you will, in terms of the people wanting this type of programming is, of course, Pima Fast Track. These things are new, and so in the 55-year history of the institution, and Dave spoke about it very well, we're very large. We have lots of processes oriented around our fall, spring, summer, repeat regimen that we have at the institution. And for these adult learners, that sort of traditional system does not always work well for them. And so the processes on which the institution runs are baked in over many decades of evolution. And so when we try to insert something new, it's usually as an add-on. But in order for these things to scale, we have to change significant systems and processes at the institution, and the details in the document have listed some of those already underway that we have accomplished with respect to banner changes, with respect to working with deans and faculty and how we schedule and integrate scheduling of these types of offerings better. So we are well on our way to more than just planting the seeds for the future enrollment growth we know can come from these initiatives. The numbers for this baseline year will not be monumental compared to the mainstay of the institution. But given the demand that we have seen compared to the numbers of courses and learners that we're actually serving and the disconnect between that, we know that there's future enrollment growth from these models and others moving forward. So I know you've had the document. I know you've had the opportunity, I hope, to review it. If there are any, and we're late in the evening, so if there are any specific questions about these or others under that banner of the Chancellor's goal, I'd love to report out on it. Currently, we are at 66% of the enrollment on the approved KPIs that you approved for interim Chancellor's goals back at the beginning of the academic year.
Thank you. Dr. Rourke, I do have a question for you. When I first met you the very first time, you told me that, there had been 2,000 people call and they were interested, and we just didn't have the manpower to touch and reach the educational needs of all of those people. And then recently I heard too that the way the system, and I don't know if it's banner or if it's, college admissions or whatever. My question for you is, would it help you, do you guys have like a team, a committee to work on these problems so they're being ameliorated sooner than later, so we don't run into those kind of situations where students just get frustrated and they don't matriculate because they're frustrated with the I don't know if it's the website or the admittance process. So my question, I guess, is twofold. Are we still in that same situation where we have more interest than we can actually take care of? And then if there are problems, do you have a committee to help ameliorate those so they're not problems as far as getting into the door?
I think I need to address that at two levels. The first is at the strategic goal level, and then the second is at the tactical or operational level. So there is a strategic plan goal that this is also a part of, and sorry, my mouth is dry, so it's going to start getting sticky. I'm good. All right, there we go. That is better. So at the strategic plan goal, I don't have the wordy goal memorized, but it's reorienting the institution to focus on the needs of adult learners and adult and new majority learners. And to clarify, that's all adults, not just those enrolled in adult basic education. We've nicknamed that no wrong doors, because we don't want there to be any no wrong, there should be no wrong door at the institution. whether that's through the website or whether that's when somebody interfaces with somebody that they're getting service from at one of our campuses or virtually. They should be able to know all of their opportunities and all of these different offerings. So I could pick any one of the programs, for example, automotive technology. We have an apprenticeship in automotive technology. We have dual enrollment in automotive technology. We have a Pima fast track in automotive technology, and we have prior learning assessment available in automotive technology. And just insert program, and that's the case for many programs. But the current system is not maximized so that all learners at all times know about all of those options that are available for them. The reason why we nicknamed it No Wrong Door is that on average, a full 50% of the learners who actually sign up for a Pima fast track decline and enroll in the credit-bearing program instead. And the reason is when they look at the schedule for a fast track, which requires more hours under a shorter period of time and longer days, it doesn't work well for them. So Pima fast track typically is oriented to those who are long-term unemployed and don't have necessarily either household or work obligations. And so many learners actually opt to enroll in the other. We want to see that expand, and so we're working cross-functionally with academic affairs, with student affairs, and with that strategic plan goal, and there is a strategic plan team that is working through that particular goal. At the operational level, the issues have been identified, and it will take some years to fix every single issue that is causing us not to maximize that potential enrollment. And it's going to be more and more critical, and more people are really embracing this because of the passage of Senate Bill 1400. And that's another thing that we're implementing and must implement, but it's not on a chancellor's goal, but it's related, right, because it supports it. Senate Bill 1400 now allows for all of those sorts of offerings, including what you have seen at Gospel Rescue Mission, what you've seen at the centers, and what you've seen with fast tracks at the campuses on the various tours we've taken you on. That now counts for full-time student equivalent, and there is a revenue source, although it's not from the state. Those are funded large part by public workforce dollars, employer pay or self-pay on the part of learners, and some scholarshiping. So there's a revenue source for it, and it also increases the footprint of the institution. We've right now done a 50%, and I'm going to get back to your other question here with some numbers that are stark, and they should challenge us to actually address these systemic issues more holistically, and I believe that we will. I believe we're at a better place. But right now, just on a back of the napkin estimate we had to do for Senate Bill 1400, this is the first year that's been law, and we're already estimating 150 footsie at this point in time in the academic year. That's new, it's not monumental, but for the first time out the gate, that just shows the growth potential with respect to footsie for these sorts of offerings. And that's for non-credit workforce training, specifically the new category that we, Pima, helped establish in law for the state of Arizona. Here's the numbers now. Since we launched in October, and I had to pull up so I got these accurate. So these are as of January 31st, 2024. And we launched Pima Fast Track in October of 2021. We've now had 5,339 total requests by real people for information on Pima Fast Track. Then now 992 information sessions attended by people. 606 one-on-one advising sessions. Those usually occur with a team called the Corporate and Community Navigators that work cross-functionally with student affairs, and then 352 enrolled. 5,539 reach outs for direct information, 352 enrolled. So there is potential there. It's not going to be all 5,000, but that enrollment funnel, I'm being very transparent about it in a public setting because that is a challenge. That enrollment funnel needs to not be so wide and needs to be a lot cleaner with respect to how many of those initial entrants we can get into these programs. And I'm convinced that working collaboratively and cross-functionally like we have been with these areas and others across the institution, that we will meet that demand. So again, the numbers and the goals seem small for these initial years, but that's because there are a lot of systems and processes that were never oriented to serving this particular demographic or this particular model. And we now have plans and processes in place to address most, if not all, of the systemic barriers that we see.
So are we cooperating with One Stop, Pima County One Stop?
to a large degree where this college has been celebrated nationally with respect to how integrated we are. So I would say that we are true partners, not just cooperative. Many of these learners, including those that are in the IBEST program and all in the Fast Track program, are co-enrolled in Arizona at Work Pima County. We actually have two team members from the workforce development team that are co-located in the Public Workforce Systems Job Center, and we are collaborating right now with Pima County and the downtown campus with funding that the county attained from the federal government to establish a job center satellite at the downtown campus. And what that will allow is the downtown campus to operate as a third job center for members of the community, will then be able to be brought on campus, but also have access to federal financial aid, the WIOA dollars and all of the various titles that come with that, as well as SNAP-CAN, which is currently being implemented on a pilot basis through Workforce Development and ABEC, Adult Basic Education, but will be expanding to the entire institution. And that's another revenue source that will help offset the real expenses that many of our learners have with respect to childcare, transportation, food, clothing, and other needs. Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much. Hope you have a great evening.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you.
So you've heard the interim chancellor's goals. We have a description of all of them, the progress for reaffirmation of accreditation, the increasing enrollment, and I hear you talk about that's a priority, a major priority for this board, and so we're going to do our best to continue with focusing on increasing in enrollment and retention, of course, and completion, and even post-completion after our students graduate and also or get a job. Enhancing a culture of care, much of the work is being done, implemented, as Dr. Irene Lopez said, this semester, but it's been a work in progress in talking to folks on the campuses and through this transition, because there's been so much movement, and so healing and valuing the work of our employees at the college and the community. And then, of course, improving effectiveness that we focused on today. And so it's not only the team, the folks that presented, but it's their teams and trickling on down to the faculty and the staff who work with our students every day. So it's a collective effort, and what you see here is progress, and we're going to continue progressing. But if you have any feedback for us, we'd really appreciate as well.
If there are no final comments, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you all for being here. Meeting adjourned.